Denver Metro Audits gets a traffic ticket. Complains about professional courtesy after refusing to hand license and registration to state trooper. Jeremiah Payne verbally assaults a Clarksville police officer who asks him to obey Tennessee's new 25-foot buffer zone law. Says the law won't let him record audio of police at work. Regan Benson gets angry outside of a condemned property. Promises yet another lawsuit against Englewood, Colorado. Irish Demon shares more updates to his recovery from a recent motorcycle accident. The angry vet tells his fans to take a plea deal and never let anyone give you gruff about it. Plus, The Odd Couple reunites. Dick Heller gives Jose Chili de Castro an exotic look at the police crackdown in Washington, D.C. I'm your humble news reader, Pants. You're a $50 shy of continuing the membership after the free trial period. What would you do to see what I'd do for a Klondike bar? Would you experience auditing insanity? YouTuber Christopher Denver Metro Audits Cordova live-streamed himself during a traffic stop on Thursday, where he received a ticket for driving 87 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone while he was traveling on Interstate 25 south of Castle Rock, Colorado. Cordova was standoffish with the state patrol officer who pulled him over, refusing to crack his window and refusing to hand the officer both his license and registration. Instead, Cordova flashed his driver's license, initially displaying an expired license to the officer before finding his current license. With cell service spotty, Cordova's livestream buffered during key moments of the pullover. At one point, he asked his audience to contact his mother if he got arrested based on the traffic stop. He said that sometimes he has warrants that he doesn't know about, and that he's typically informed of them when he's pulled over. Cordova updated his main channel's shadow ban, stating that he believed that YouTube may have removed the ban after the last conference they had with his attorney, that Randall S. the Unhinged Attorney Newman, Esquire. While waiting for the state trooper to return to update his status, Cordova pondered how many speeding laws police break when they have to catch a speeder when the police officer is parked. He then spent a moment reflecting on how people are supposed to feel safe around police, and that they don't because of what he called predatory policing. Before he could expound further, the state patrol officer returned to give Cordova his ticket. The YouTuber received 6 points on his license for going 87 in a 65, with a $627.50 fine. It would have been 3 points and a $313 fine. However, Cordova was in a construction zone, which resulted in the penalties being doubled. Cordova can pay the fine in 20 days to have 2 of the points removed, or can contest the ticket at an October court hearing. The YouTuber asked the state patrol officer for his card, and the officer refused to do so, stating that his information was at the bottom of the ticket. When pressed, the trooper explained that policy is to give out cards when no paperwork is presented. Since the trooper gave Cordova the information on his ticket, there was no need for a card. Cordova again pressed, asking for a card out of professional courtesy, then claimed that the officer's handwriting was sloppy, which resulted in the officer walking away from him. Addressing the camera, Cordova said that the traffic stop was over, so it was okay to get out of his truck. He exited the vehicle and asked the Douglas County officer who was assisting at the scene if he could do a U-turn over the double yellow lines without getting in trouble. The officer said it was fine. Cordova then again approached the state trooper, insisting he needed the officer's card out of professional courtesy. The officer poked back at Cordova, stating that Cordova showed him no such courtesy when he asked to see Cordova's driver's license. At this point, Cordova's phone buffered and returned with him getting back into his truck, verifying that he had the officer give him his badge number, and eventually driving off. Cordova's court date is October 16th, 2025 at 8:30 a.m. in Douglas County. Jeremiah Payne's most recent video saw something that viewers of the Tennessee-based YouTuber do in quite some time, as he would admit that he was wrong about a law after the events of the video played out. Payne was in Clarksville, Tennessee, doing a First Amendment audit of traffic stops in the parking area of a Fred's One gas station and convenience store. He observed as a Clarksville police officer had a woman pulled over in a sports car. He stayed less than 10 feet away from the scene for most of the video, interacting with the driver to ascertain that she was speeding. When the Clarksville police officer directed Payne to stay 25 feet from the scene, Payne refused to do so and began to argue that the Supreme Court said it was 10 feet. When he was again directed to stand 25 feet from the active area, Payne went on a profanity-laced tirade against the officer. He complained that 25 feet would prevent him from picking up audio from the scene, and that the officer had nothing to fear with him at the scene since the officer was armed. Payne continued to swear at the officer and hurl insults until the officer drove off. Tennessee enacted HB 0055 earlier this year, which, according to its online summary, quote, creates a Class B misdemeanor for a person to intentionally approach within 25 feet a law enforcement officer who is lawfully engaged in the execution of the officer's official duties after the officer has ordered the person to stop approaching or to retreat, unquote. The bill also makes it illegal for a suspect to refuse to provide their name or give false name to a police officer if the officer has reasonable suspicion to believe that the person has violated or is violating a state law or local ordinance. HB 0055 also makes it illegal to place a sign, signal, or marking over a highway, or to affix a sign, signal, or marking to a bridge, overpass, or tunnel without written authorization from the entity that maintains the structure. Strangely, the bill also outlaws littering and trespassing on real or personal property of another person, quote, with the intent to unlawfully intimidate another from the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured by the Constitution or laws of the state of Tennessee, end quote. Payne would later continue to express his outrage at the law in the comments area of the video. I did Google it. There is a 25-foot thing by Tennessee state law, but if you stand 25 feet away, you're not going to hear nothing that is going on, and that is the whole point of recording it, to make sure that cops isn't lying to them or trying to violate their rights. These cops in Clarksville, Tennessee, they know who I am, and they know I'm not going to do anything to them, but yet they're so big of... Even the one man they know isn't going to do nothing to them. They're scared of. So my question is, if you're that scared even of a man you know for a fact has never assaulted a cop and will never assault a cop, because I am not willing to use any amount of violence necessary to get them to submit to my will like they are, why become a cop if you're that big a... HB 0055 went into effect statewide on July 1st, 2025. Englewood, Colorado saw the return of its most famous detractor Friday afternoon as Regan Benson, accompanied by friend Sarah, returned to sit across the street from a condemned house that used to be Sarah's residence, while the new owner removed more items from the residence. The home was condemned, and Sarah and her family were evicted last year following several incidents involving her brother and his friends, resulting in a police investigation. Those evicted, including Sarah's elderly great-grandfather, who had legally adopted Sarah as his daughter. Benson had been documenting the plight of Sarah's family, as the home has gone through several stages of legal proceedings that ultimately saw the house condemned for methamphetamine contamination before being sold to a new owner earlier in the year. Sarah's mother, who is currently homeless, fought for and eventually gained the right to retrieve personal belongings from the house. Sarah herself, however, received the right to retrieve family belongings from the house, only to have conditions placed on her visit by Englewood City Attorney Tamron Niles. While Sarah and Englewood are still negotiating terms in which Sarah would be allowed back into the house to retrieve family heirlooms, as documented by Benson, the new owner of the house is actively moving forward with removing those items and apparently destroying them. Before Benson's live stream started, she apparently had an encounter with one of the workers who was in the process of removing items from the house. That person called the police to report Benson, and police cars were arriving on scene when Benson went live. Benson met with the officers on the scene, who, after one officer got a statement from the worker, essentially told Benson they couldn't do anything about the removal of the items, as the house is marked as condemned and is currently under state jurisdiction. The YouTuber later received a call from a worker for technical assistance and regulatory guidance. Methamphetamine affected properties for Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, who confirmed that he could not see any process violations or improper activities in the sale of the house. That worker also confirmed that, despite Benson's claims, the workers inside the house did not need a permit to remove or dispose of items in a house that was contaminated with methamphetamine. Benson has stated that she will be helping Sarah sue the city of Englewood and the new owner of the property, now that Sarah will be unable to retrieve her family's belongings from the property. While Benson threatened to report the workers to police should they return to interact with her, the workers quietly finished their work and left the scene without incident. Friday's mukbang video by Kevin the Angry Vet Soper saw the YouTube sensation return to Maryland and his favorite restaurant for another discussion of the First Amendment auditing community, life, and, of course, his thoughts on everything else. Soper started the video at his favorite sushi place, where he ordered a meal and began to talk about his thoughts on taking plea deals in comparison to fighting charges that would ultimately lead to financial ruin and possible jail time. The YouTuber gave an example of a woman and her husband who would be facing 7 charges between them on a federal level. They were offered a plea deal, which would result in a $120 fine and time served. Soper claimed the First Amendment auditing community as a whole would have a problem with that, as he said many believe that a person needs to go all in on their defense and ignore taking any deals. Pointing out the ridiculousness of that idea, Soper explained that sometimes you have to take a minor loss in order to avoid doing jail time. He explained that if you can get off by pleading to something minor, avoiding a trial and extending jail time, then there should be no stigma in doing so. He then turned his attention to the trolls, who he said were wrong 90% of the time, and they don't understand how the law or the court works. He told anyone who wanted to represent themselves in court to go to his charity's website and review the pro se education course he presents there. Soper assured his fans that while they may not get everything they need to represent themselves, they'd be on much better footing than going alone without the guidelines. Switching gears, Soper said that he needed a good haircut and a beard trim. He offered a $500 donation to his SCARS 501c3 in the name of the person who would allow him to come to their house and let them cut his hair. The haircutting offer is interesting, as Soper's previous hair-related promotion apparently vanished without resolution. Earlier in the year, Soper and members of his The Servicemen and Citizens for American Rights Society, or SCARS, nonprofit organization, announced an initiative to take donations that would ultimately result in Soper donating a good portion of his hair to the Locks of Love charity. Soper was seeking between $15,000 and $50,000 by an August 15th deadline to cut his hair, with the rule that the more that was donated to this organization, the more hair would go to Locks of Love. Friday's deadline passed without a statement from the organization as to how the promotion did or if it raised enough for any sort of donation to the Locks of Love charity. Friday saw Soper's GoFundMe campaign bring in no new donations, as the win for the day went to Sean Paul Long Island Audit Reyes, with a $295 in new donations to his Stand With Me to Hold Brian Fahey Accountable Fund. Saturday was much of the same, with no donations to Soper's fund, and Reyes's Fahey Fund winning the day with $50 in new donations. No other campaigns that we follow saw donations for either day. Soper has since set his video to members only. YouTuber and motorcycle enthusiast John Irish Demon O'Day posted another update to his YouTube community tab on Saturday, detailing the latest developments in his recovery from his latest motorcycle accident last month. O'Day wrote, "It's been a rough few months for us, and this only makes it harder. I'm finally home and resting and dealing with the challenges of moving around and trying to live comfortably while these ribs and the ankle heal.
Thankfully, the ankle and shin fractures, although painful and requiring a lot of time and patience to heal, won't require surgery as long as they keep healing as they are. The ribs are fairly bad. 7 affected ribs, 10 fractures total, and all very tender and sore, but definitely healing very quickly. Clavicle fracture was very tiny and didn't really hurt at all. Shoulder blade fracture is also super tiny, and while painful, isn't very bad. The Harley is pretty much totaled and will need a full rebuild, but hey, that's a nice project for when I start to recover more. I'm doing all this on very basic over-the-counter pain relief because my experience with the stronger stuff in hospital was brutal. Nausea and cramps being the worst, and a general feeling of being zoned out just isn't for me. I want to thank my amazing fiancé, my family, my brothers, my friends, my neighbors, and all of you for your continued support. I simply couldn't do it without all of you. And now for my rating of pain broken down. Ankle fracture, 6 out of 10. Not fun. Clavicle fracture, 1 out of 10. Barely noticeable. Shoulder blade fracture, 3 out of 10. Kinda blows. Rib fractures, 8 out of 10. Would not recommend. Damaging my Harley, 100 out of 10. Worst pain ever. Sláinte.
Despite criticism from his detractors, O'Day has yet to ask for donations towards his recovery, as his insurance is expected to take care of all his needs during the recovery process. O'Day has had a rough year after losing a great deal of his fandom after he had been accused of various misdeeds over the past year and a half. Those accusations, including grifting his fans out of money for various causes and then failing to distribute that money, receiving and trading in nude photos of female fans, and hacking Jose Chili de Castro's YouTube account to broadcast explicit same-sex pornography. The accusations of hacking have resulted in a federal lawsuit filed against O'Day, filed last month, with De Castro seeking financial and punitive damages for the supposed hack. When asked for an update on the lawsuit against O'Day, De Castro's attorney, that Randall S., the unhinged attorney Newman, Esquire, shared the following, quote, "Happy to hear Irish Demon survived the motorcycle crash and is back out of the hospital. Wishing him a speedy recovery, because he'll need to be healthy enough to check his email. Initiating documents are on their way, and hopefully he accepts service so we don't have to waste the court's time filing a motion." While O'Day briefly mentioned that he was being sued on a live stream while he was hospitalized, he has yet to be served in the ongoing suit. Electricity was in the air Saturday night as old friends Jose Chili de Castro and Dick Heller met up in that nation's capital to come together in friendship in a tour of the city for evidence of a government crackdown on civil rights. Driving in Heller's ancient Jeep, De Castro marveled aloud at the spectacle he was seeing. "What body of water is that?" he questioned as Heller avoided pedestrians in the road. "Oh, that's the National Reflecting Pool," Heller replied as De Castro gently placed his hand on Heller's shoulder. It had been over a year since the two men reunited publicly, and the dramatic tension was in the air as they toured the troubled city. De Castro, usually an anti-Trump advocate, giggled as Heller said that the Chinese call the Washington Monument the pencil. De Castro hung on every word as a twinkle appeared in Heller's eye as he began to tell tales of the 20 or so major lawsuits Heller has put in front of courts in the area, with at least one reaching the Supreme Court. The latest lawsuit, Heller said with a smile, would prevent the government from raising taxes to help fund more illegal aliens to vote, as the illegals would vote any way the government would tell them to, which is ruining our country, according to Heller. De Castro quickly switched to the case of dreamy Kyle Rittenhouse, who he supported, who was found innocent of brandishing an assault rifle and murdering protesters a few years back, who was now apparently part of the world of guns right activist Heller. Again, placing his hand on Heller's shoulder, De Castro, who had just landed after a long trek from California, asked where all the National Guardsmen were, as President Donald J. Trump's show of force was supposed to be locking down the Capitol. Heller said that President's public safety emergency in Washington, D.C. had made 100 arrests a night of the worst, drug offenders, murderers, and others. He dashingly stated that the communists and the fake news made up the story of the oppressive forces in the city. De Castro quickly added that the fake news lied about the riots in L.A. earlier in the summer, despite De Castro being hit by a water bottle from friendly fire and his claims of being shot with a rubber bullet that ended his interactions with police in great pain. There were no signs of the Trump takeover until they reached Union Station, where several military vehicles were parked outside the building. Various armed members of the National Guard interacted with pedestrians, and someone could be heard screaming over a bullhorn at the armed forces. Heller, that rascal, screamed "Freedom!" at the protesters as he and De Castro were briefly parked at a red light, adding that the troops were in the city, quote, "because you are morons," unquote, and then asking a black protester, quote, "Are you still a slave?" unquote. De Castro asked if Union Station was dangerous, and Heller explained that bands of muggers would regularly attack old people at the station. Then he berated the idea that someone would get a permit from the communist mayor of Washington, D.C. to put up a tent where someone hung a sign berating the President of the United States. The YouTuber changed the subject, still gently touching Heller's shoulder on camera, and reminding Heller of what a great friend he was, as De Castro was in jail last year. He explained to his adoring fans on his live stream that Heller brought him great relief while in jail and did so much more than anyone knew in lifting his spirits. A few minutes later, as Washington, D.C. was fairly free of armed troops and protests Saturday night, Heller, in a thoughtful gesture, pulled the car over and parked for De Castro when he spotted that police had someone pulled over on the other side of the street. Free of the confines of the Jeep, De Castro hoped as he walked, determined to do a real First Amendment audit in the nation's capital, something that would impress his fans and his host, Dick Heller. Alas, he was a little too slow, as the assembled police officers were wrapping up the traffic stop. De Castro begged them for a little time to answer his questions, as he just came in from a flight all the way from California and knew nothing about the great city. Sadly, police in the capital acted just like police in his beloved Los Angeles, referring him to their public information officer for details of crime in the city. DeCastro's charm, it seems, which worked so well on Dick Heller, couldn't persuade the police on either coast to lay down their barriers and allow the penetration of thought past their crisp blue uniforms. DeCastro ended his second live stream Saturday night by thanking his buddy D, adding, "You know who you are," for apparently funding the trip to see Heller. Returning Sunday afternoon, Heller and DeCastro were back at Union Station as it was raining heavily and protesters were gathering outside the building. A large black woman held up a banner reading, "What Trump order won't you obey?" Much like the night before, there was no real activity between protesters and the National Guard at the train station. Disappointed, DeCastro meekly returned to Heller's Jeep as Dick Heller flashed him a smile and happily appeared in front of his camera lens. The live stream ended as DeCastro promised that he would be returning later in the night as he was set to attend a major protest downtown. DeCastro did not live stream again Sunday night. The YouTuber's adventures in the nation's capital did nothing to spur donations to his GoFundMe to sue 2 Nevada judges in the name of freedom. Despite DeCastro's previous statements that he was a great fundraiser, both his fund for Craig Henry and his own anti-judge campaign have gone past the midpoint of August without donations for the month. Sunday's crowdfunding race was won by Sean Paul Long Island Audit Reyes, who took in $20 in new donations for the day to his Stand With Me to Hold Brian Fahey Accountable fund. Reyes would also win Monday's take, bringing in $40 for the day, as no other funds that we follow saw donations for the weekend. It is unclear how long DeCastro will be vacationing with dear friend Dick Heller. We'll be bringing updates to his coverage of the DC takeover as he goes live again from our nation's capital. We need your help. Both ReallyCoolSite.org's daily newspaper and our daily newscasts are funded by your continuing donations and what we make from our YouTube AdSense revenue each month. If you'd like to contribute to help us keep the lights on, eating, feeding the cats, defending ourselves from lawsuit threats, and writing news stories to feature on both the newspaper and newscast each day, you can do so via a donation to our PayPal, Cash App, or GoFundMe accounts. If you can't afford to contribute, please watch our videos from the beginning to end, like, share, subscribe, and comment. You can help by doing next to nothing, and we thank you in advance for pitching in.